So, are we rolling, Mike? We are rolling. This will be recorded, and you can watch it again and again on our YouTube channel. Yeah, you're going live all around the world, and it is going to be recorded. We're live streaming now. If live stream doesn't work, we can always just watch the recording later. So I will go through the announcements very quickly, so we're a little late, so I'll just rush right through these. First of all, we're at the AWS Loft. I want to thank AWS for having us, giving us this beautiful space. Hope everyone enjoys it. There's some beverages in the back in the fridge if you need. Hope everyone enjoys space here. And I'm sorry the registration took so long. I didn't realize kind of how long it would be. Next I'll put bigger notifications in the email. So, very quickly, jobs. Who's hiring? Anyone hiring? Yeah, this is my first hand goes in the back on the video. Yeah, and by the way, anyone's hiring after the talk, come over here so people can come find you and say, go to the pizza table afterwards and people can find you, okay? First job listening.
I'm Jeremy. I lead the data team at Kickstarter, and we are hiring a second data engineer. So if you're interested in helping us build out a more robust, flexible data infrastructure from top, you know,
All right.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I manage the analytics and engineering team at Etsy. I work with Emily almost every day, and we're hiring a senior data engineer. So I'd love to talk with you afterwards.
Etsy's hiring a senior data engineer, so we'll be at the pizza table after the talk.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, speaking of pizza, today came from First Street Pizza, which for any, everyone knows about original Ray's, famous original Ray's. This is actually the first ever Ray's pizza. That's changed the name of First Street Pizza to go with that. So, if you want, well, if you like it or don't like it, go to bit.ly/pizzapoll, all lowercase pizzapoll, and vote on the pizza place. That is bit.ly/pizzapoll. Those of you who are regulars here know we have a live data feed of all the votes. So please go vote bit.ly/pizzapoll. Next up, a few discount codes for you. I'm getting rid of echo. Does this sound better? Alright, right here. We have a 3-day SPAM masterclass coming up in August. It's taught by Andrew Gelman, Jonah Gadbury, and Michael Bedingford. It's 3 days learning about babies, MCMC, and STAM. It's a lot of fun. It's a 30-year-old done it. The past 2 years sold out. We're doing it again. The proceeds go to support development of STAM language and help out the speed up a little bit. If you want a 20% discount, use code NYHACKR. The name of our video. That's your discount code because everyone here should not pay full price. Similarly, and I'll give away these flyers. Would someone mind just toss these around? Thank you. This is for JupyterCon. Anyone who wants to go to JupyterCon and wants a 20% discount, use it. This is in the meetup page. UGNYHackR20. That gives you 20% discount to JupyterCon. That same discount code, UGNYHackR20, will give you a 20% discount to Strata coming up in September. Alright, so use that anytime actually there's an O'Reilly event, UGNYHackR20 gives you 20% discount. Alright? So use it and enjoy that discount. The R Consortium, I sent an email out a few days ago, has a survey. If you guys didn't see my email, check the message board. The R Consortium is an umbrella organization that helps promote the R language. They have a survey, it's a short survey. Please go and take the survey. It's good for the R community, and the data will be made open, of course. The videos from the New York R Conference back in April are online. I don't know if I mentioned that in the last meetup. rstats.nyc/2017. You can see all the videos from this year's conference. And it's /2016/2015 gets you previous year's videos. We have a new website, those of you who have not seen it, nyhackr.org. Go there to our website to meet up, and there's a link to our Slack channel, and you can join and talk about R and everything we do. If you're not R, Python, Julia, Go, whatever it may be on there. And events are posted. In fact, we have a job listing page. Kickstarter is listed your job on our job listing page. So go there, check out the jobs, check out the events, and just chat with your friends. And we even have dedicated channels for asking questions about various programming languages. So go take advantage of that. Our next meetup is going to be in August, most likely here at the end of August. Dan and Fonda from Amazon actually giving a talk about deep learning in R. So no matter what anybody says, you can do deep learning languages besides Python. You can totally do an R with a bunch of languages, and he will be talking about MXNet. actually, I have a few giveaways. Companies to leave my apartment. We have 2 extra large shirts. It says extra large. So the winner of this first tiny extra large shirt is Matthew Tucker. Matthew Tucker. If you're not here, just going to throw it randomly as far as I will go. I say that. You don't qualify. Get rid of it.
I'll reinvestigate this.
And just to show this is not rigged, I do things randomly using R. The 4th winner was me. And the last place drawn was Emily. So you know it's a little bit rigged.
And you threw it to me.
Then you got it. John Rosenfelder. Who doesn't show up? Jared Lent, nope. Andrew won. Andrew? There you go. You guys win. They came from the factory. And then, because O'Reilly sent me a couple of Python books and I want them out of my house. Actually, Jonathan Arbach, you were next on this list. You like Python? Think of something else.
Yeah.
There you go. And the next person on this list is Sandy Vanderbilt. Sandy? Vanderbilt? Sandy? All right. Guy Feldman. All right. I'm going to toss it to you. All right, good. Enjoy your prizes. Oh, yeah, that's right. Emily said I could do this. Since I felt bad giving away a bunch of Python books, I'm also going to give away an R book. Just because I couldn't have all these Python books to be given away at this meetup and not be justified. So this is, I still like to look at Python and say, this isn't how we meet up. Actually, we have Python talks, we have Julia, we have Joe, we have all the talks. I personally just like to make fun of Python, so I'm a good friend, and a big Python person. But we do have Python talks here, and we have one commit later this year. So while I do like teasing, we do Python here. So don't let me just put on those extra lines. So this meetup is about statistical programming in any open language. Alright, the only thing is to go to center of closed source languages. So, the winner for this one is, next up is Emily Dowdell. Emily, different one. That's nice. I will not go to this one because it's a little heavier and I want this on it. Yeah, oh yeah, there you go. There you go. I will sign it afterwards. I got off the stage. Thank you for that. So, with that, I am off the stage. Our next speaker has been a long time member of the meetup. She is an organizer of our Ladies NYC. Let you know it's a for-women, not just for-women, but
yeah, targeted
brand organized, targeted towards women. We are a group that has book reading clubs, that has meetups, and events and everything. Frequent member of the frequent attendee of the art conference, featured speaker at the art conference. Hanging out. And she's going to talk to us about A/B testing and all the fun and perils that go with that. So, Emily.
All right. So first, can everyone hear me with my 2 mics? Yep, looking good. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Emily Robinson. I'm a data analyst at Etsy. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about A/B testing. So, you know, working at Etsy is great. We have such wonderful teams, including our legal team, which is why I have this next slide. So just a disclaimer, so this talk represents my own views, not that of Etsy. All right, we can go over, so a bit of an overview of what I'll be talking about. I'm first gonna give a quick introduction to Etsy, because that's where a lot of my examples come from. Another introduction to A/B testing, and then go on to the challenges and lessons that you can find with A/B testing, both statistical and business. So what is Etsy? So this is our tagline. So we're an online marketplace for handmade, vintage, and craft goods. So we don't own any, we don't keep any inventory ourselves, but rather we connect sellers and buyers all around the world to each other. And so our items can range pretty widely. So it goes from this $5 slime, which is one of our most popular search terms. For those of you who don't know, this is a whole phenomenon. A lot of stores are running out of glue. You can see here, these usually go for like $5 or $9. Then you have some groomsmen gifts. So these are handmade with leather, monogrammed. And finally, all the way up to a $35,000 engagement ring. So there's just a really wide range of items that you can get on the site. And so it's all numbers people. Here are some of our numbers. So we have 1.8 million active sellers, 29.7 million active buyers, which means someone who's made a purchase in the past year. $2.84 billion in annual GMS. GMS stands for gross merchandise sales, so that $35,000 engagement ring, if it sells, is $35,000 of GMS, while Etsy only gets 3.5% of that money. The rest goes to the seller. We count GMS as one of our key metrics. And finally, we have more than 45 million items for sales. And those three I showed you were just some small examples. So A/B testing. So I'm going to walk you through an example of what it is. So A/B testing is where a company wants to test how effective a change is, or even if it's effective at all. And this can range from pretty small to much larger changes. So this is Sam, and Sam logs on and goes to Etsy one day, and we're running an A/B test. And he can see one of two things. So he can see this add to cart symbol on the left, or this one on the right. It's a bit of a spot the differences. You can see this was just a small color change we did. As you might notice by this presentation, Etsy's brand color is orange, and so we changed some of our buttons from green to orange and the price from green to black. So this is a pretty small change, but we still tested it out. We want to make sure that it didn't have any adverse effects. But that was more of a foundational change. So we can do it for new features and bigger things too. So it used to be if you searched something on Etsy and there were no results, this is the page you would get. So it would say, we couldn't find any results for this. Here are some alternatives. And the alternatives were just served up basically by chopping off words from your search term. So we wanted to offer a better experience than this. So what we tried is redirecting you. So now if you search that same search term, because we've launched this after running the experiment, you will see instead it will say, OK, now we're showing results cute sneakers for puppies. We couldn't find small cute sneakers for puppies. But if we didn't get it right, if you actually wanted something else, we offer you some alternatives. So A/B testing is really widely used. So it's used at all of the big technology companies, as well as smaller companies and non-tech companies, because Qubit and Optimizely down there are just one of many companies that offer experimentation platforms. So for LinkedIn, at Etsy, Facebook, Amazon, we all have usually our own experimentation team internally with our own built platforms, but for companies that can't do that, Optimizely and Qubit and others offer a way for them to also take advantage of A/B testing. It's pretty well researched. So when I was starting out A/B testing at Etsy, I wanted to read a lot of papers, and there certainly are a lot. So we have some written by LinkedIn, people at Qubit, Google, Microsoft. So they're basically publishing about what they've learned and challenges they've encountered. Now, when I first went into it, I come from the social sciences, so I was doing experimentation, and I had to deal with small sample sizes. I had to recruit participants, and there's a lot of criticism sometimes about psych research, especially if you're doing them on undergrads. It isn't representative. You're not measuring the real outcome of interest, et cetera. So I was thinking, OK, I'm at Etsy now. We have millions of visitors daily. We have a data engineering pipeline set up. So basically, I don't have to do any of the work of the ETL, the extract, transform, load process. So essentially, every night, when people come to the site, every night we bundle up all the events that they did on the site. We put those into visits. We assign those visits. We say whether they were in a certain experiment, were they in the control or the treatment. And then the statistics are even calculated for us. So all of this is set up. So basically I thought, all right, this is a piece of cake. Why do they even need us here? The stats are all aggregated. The tests are done. What can be so hard? Well, the theme of this talk is generating numbers is easy, but generating numbers you should trust is hard, and generating the right numbers and making the right interpretation. So that's a lot what I'll be talking about. But I also wanted to add, so why statistics anyway? So this was something that was said to the Microsoft experimentation team. They said basically election surveys are done with a few thousand people, right? And you and other big companies, you have millions of people. Like, can't you just tell, right? Can't you just look at the numbers and it becomes very obvious? If you can do this with 1,000 people and forecast the outcome of the election, the last one notwithstanding, why can't you do it here? Well, the thing is we're targeting very small effects. So for example, at Etsy, and this conversion rate is not our conversion rate. So conversion rate, by the way, those of you who don't know, which is percentage of people that buy. As an example, we might target something like this, where we want to go from 6 to 6.03, a 0.5% change, right? Not 6 to 9%, not 6 to 7%, 6 to 6.03. And the reason we target such small effects is those are actually very meaningful to us. So those can be millions of dollars annually. But as you can imagine, it's really hard to stare at that number and say whether that's different or not without any sort of test applied. So that's why we need statistical tests. So I'm just going to go through an example experiment that we recently ran. So I work with the search team at Etsy. So I have done work around our ranking algorithms that order our search results to new changes to our search user interface. And one thing we wanted to do is we wanted to update our listing card. So when you did a search, how you saw the listings represented. And this is a bit of a spot the differences. So what we did here was actually 4 changes bundled together. So we made the price bigger. We made the title 2 lines instead of 1. We added the shop rating, so the numbers of rating and the average reviews. And finally, we took away the border. And what happened? So we launched this experiment, and we give it a week, and we see how our key metrics move. And it didn't work. So everything remained neutral except clicks, which actually went down. Now, of course, the question here you want to ask is why? Why did this happen? And so this is one of the hard parts when you bundle 4 changes together. So even when you just do 1 change, it's still pretty hard to answer why. That might be a better question for qualitative research, actually. But especially when you have multiple changes, it could be any one of them or a combination. So my guess was it's the ratings. People now see the ratings. That used to be you had to click on the item and then go to the listing page to see that. So maybe we're just losing these non-valuable clicks. People who would have clicked found that, oh, this shop doesn't have as high a rating as I would like, and left. So that's why we didn't see any change in the number of people buying. But this is just a hypothesis. So what we did was we ran an experiment again. And now we changed it. So in one variant, we had 2-line title and no ratings. And in the other variant, we had the ratings and 1-line title. And we wanted to see how that did. And so, I was coming in expecting, okay, maybe neither of them are going to do well, but if either of them does well, it's going to be the one on the left. And it's why we do experimentation. I was wrong. So that one did kind of the same as the first one, and this one did well. And we improved our key metrics and click-through rate, and so we celebrated and we launched. So that just walks you through, kind of a day in life of something that I've worked on recently. So now on to the challenges. So the first question is, what is your level of analysis for an experiment? So I say conversion rate, other metrics, click-through rate. Okay, so those are a denominator and numerator, but what are the units of analysis? And an experiment name, and we hash it with your cookie or your device ID. And that's always how we determine what you see, whether it's a control or a treatment, because we don't want you, seeing an inconsistent experience while the experiment is running. But we still have a choice then. So we can look at the visit. So this is an activity by a browser over a defined period of time, so 30 minutes. And what that means is if I come to Etsy and I search, and running a search ranking experiment, now I'm bucketed. Say I'm bucketed into the variant. Then I go and I get a cup of coffee. I come back 45 minutes later, and I click on something. And now if I click on that, that's going to start a new visit because it's been more than 30 minutes of inactivity. So we could look at the browser level. So this is the cookie or device ID. So this is the same thing that we bucket on. So in this case, I would still be one browser coming back. It wouldn't restart the clock. And finally, you can do user. So user is a signed-in user ID. So I'm not going to talk as much about the user because that doesn't work for a company like Etsy generally. So, and why I say that is Etsy's a website which you can do basically everything being logged out. So you can now even buy something on Etsy. You could always browse and do a lot of the behavior without ever logging in. So user works really well for a social network company, say like Facebook or LinkedIn, where really to use the site, you need to be logged in. But for a company like Etsy, it would just exclude a lot of our visitors from the experiment. So I'm going to focus on talking about visit in browser. So simple. So here we have Liz. And Liz thinks, I really want my own lightsaber. So where does she go? She goes to Etsy, and she searches. And we're running a search ranking experiment. And so she's bucketed into the variant. She sees all these lightsabers. She says, wow, I really like this one. I'm going to favorite it, and I'm going to buy it. Or not buy it, I'm just going to favorite it and leave there. She's not ready to commit. But then the next day she comes back, and she's like, I really like that lightsaber. She visits her favorites. She doesn't do a search. She adds it to cart, and she buys, and we all celebrate. Now, what's happened here is if you were looking at it from evaluating the experiment, this would count as one visit, because only one of the times she came to the site did she do a search. And it would be a non-converting visit because she didn't buy. On the other hand, she would be one browser who did buy. So this is a real-life example of how the metrics could look different depending on how we evaluate it. So how do we think about which one we choose? I'm going to go through some of the benefits and drawbacks of each. So for the visit, you have a tighter attribution. So when you only look at things that happen within session, within a session that includes the change that you introduced, you can be a little more confident it came because of your change, because you're not looking at much later behavior. Now, on the flip side, as we saw with Liz, sometimes that later behavior is related to the change that you made. And that's the advantage of browser. So it captures this later behavior that is very relevant. Visit has a problem some of you might have picked up on, which is the independence violation assumption. So, and what this is here is that, the statistical tests we use, they assume each unit in our analysis is independent of each other. But of course, say Liz had come back and searched 10 times on Etsy. Now that would count as 10 visits, but obviously they're not independent of each other. And so this can lead to a big increase in your false positive rates. And there are some workarounds for that. So what we do with our app experiments, for example, is we bootstrap them. So basically, well, we know Liz is the same person. She came and visited twice or 10 times, so we can bootstrap on a browser ID. But that is an issue, which is sort of naively doing visits. And browser, on the other hand, can introduce noise. So let's say we were running an experiment that targeted a much smaller section of the site, and we ran it over 3 weeks. And let's say someone entered the experiment when they went to the section of the site, but that was on the first day, and they haven't gone back since, and 3 weeks later they buy something. Did that really come from our experiment? Probably not, but we're still counting it as having come towards our experimental metrics. So finally, for visits, we have a cannibalization potential. So as you might have noticed, when I said with Liz, she had 1 visit, not the 2 that she did, because only one of them involved search. So what could happen here is you could just shift people's purchases around. So search, oh wow, you're looking at the visit level, it's doing really well. But what you could be missing is that they would have bought anyway, just maybe at a later time in another way, say by going to our shop home or by a different way of buying. And finally, for browser, the problem here is you could miss multiple events for proportion metrics. So conversion rate, right, it's a binary metric. Did you buy or did you not buy? And if Liz came and bought 6 times during the course of our experiment, she'll still only count as 1 converting browser. So overall, we've decided that we offer both. So we have an internal experimentation tool called Catapult. And basically what you can do is every day it updates, and you can look and you can see the results for your experiment. So you can see the control versus your variance, the rates for each metric, and the calculated statistical test for whether it's significant or not. So people can see both visit and browser, but we generally emphasize using browser. And so one way we started to solve for this missing multiple events was making a metric that we call ACBV. And I'll go into that a little bit, because what's one of our key metrics per user? Well, it probably doesn't surprise you that it's gross merchandise sales, or GMS, per user. So the problem is this is a very badly behaved distribution. So if you think about it, it's highly skewed. So you have some people purchasing that $35,000 engagement ring, but most people purchase items of much lesser value. Strictly non-negative. You can't have a negative interaction. You can't buy something for minus $10 on the site. So you can't use the t-test. And there's a lot of zeros, so a lot of people who don't buy. So you can't simply log all the numbers. So what we did was we created this metric we called average converting browser value, or average converting visit value. So this is the distribution for it. And this is over different time periods, so say a couple days or 2 weeks of browsers. Of the browsers that bought something, what was their value? And the thing you can see here right away is it's still very skewed. So now it's strictly positive. It's still quite skewed, and this is actually with the outliers cut off. So this isn't even as skewed as the distribution is. We cut off the very extreme right tail. And the question is, okay, what tests do you use for this, and how do you figure that out? So what we did was we tried a couple different ones. And so I want to walk through quickly some definitions, because I know we have a wide range of backgrounds here. So just a bit of a review. So power, probability of if there's an effect of a certain magnitude, we're going to detect it. So that was something we were very concerned about with our tests, because if we actually move this metric, we wanted to make sure that we would know that. And so we wanted to pick a test with very good power. Bootstrapping, random sampling with replacement. And simulation is a way to model random events. And this will all come into play with how we develop this test. So what we did to select the right test, we took a real experiment that we were very confident actually moved this metric because of the change we introduced. So we use that as our baseline. We have a control and a variant there. And we know that the overall truth of that is that ACBV increased for the variant. And what we then did was we applied a lot of different tests, and we estimated the power of it. And we did this by bootstrapping. So we said, OK, we had a real number. So we had a real number of browsers that converted. Let's say it was 100,000 in each variant. But we said, okay, but what, all right, so let's, if we randomly sampled and replaced with this and did that 1,000 times, how many times would we detect with different tests that there was a change? And okay, now we do that for 100,000. How about 25,000? How about if our sample size had been 500,000? We do all of this bootstrapping so we can get an idea of, okay, what % of the time is our test giving us back a p-value of less than 0.05? So I know the axes are a little small to read here, but what you have on the left is power. On the x-axis is the sample size. And basically what you can see pretty easily is one tested terribly. That was a t-test. Not too surprising here with this terribly skewed distribution. And then 2 tested very well. So what did really well here was the t-test of the log of the numbers and the Wilcox rank sum test. So we now have an idea of, okay, these 2 tests seem like they're going to do pretty well. But that's for our specific experiment with the specific percentage change that we had. So how can we expand this to other experiments that we might do? And what we did for that was simulation. But of course, the question is, okay, simulating means, okay, how can we have a control, okay, how can we estimate what it would look like, this distribution, if there was a 1% change? And there's a lot of choices you have here, different simulation methods. So we tried out a bunch of them. And basically what we did here was we said, okay, the difference, let's take the difference in mean from the real treatment group and the real control group. Okay, we have a distribution for that. Now let's try out how it would look from the control to all our different simulation methods. And let's see which ones match the best. And that's going to give us a good idea of, okay, which is a good simulation metric. And you can see there are a couple different things because there's difference in the regular means, the log means. But basically overall, we found that 2 worked very well, which is a simulation with a log normal method and just a straight multiplication, like I'm just multiplying the numbers by 1% every number. That actually did pretty well. So now what happens when we look at the power? So we try doing this simulation to replicate our true experiment and see how it compares. And so what we see is the one in the middle there is the true experiment power curve. And it's bounded by our 2 simulation methods. So one is more conservative, so the power is a lot lower, and one is higher. Basically, this could help us form the confidence bounds. So now we were able to say, okay, if we have a real 1% change in ACVV, what is going to, how much power are we going to have, and this forms our power bounds. Now, that was a lot of stats. I know we have some stats PhDs in here. It's probably going to be the most exciting part. The rest of the experiment, the rest of the presentation, it's a lot less statistics heavy. And it's actually going to talk about the business challenges. So those of you in data science or research or any kind of technology might know, yes, the technical skills are hard and important, but the other big part is your business skills and communication, on working with teams. And if you don't have those skills, it can actually be very hard to advance and be very effective in your job. So when I came to Etsy, so as I said, I work with different teams. So Etsy's analytics work where we embed with other partner teams. And so I've embedded with the search team. And one thing my manager told me is working with teams are each a special snowflake. So that's what I want to get out first. So I've worked with 3 different teams now, all in search. And the working style that they have and what they know is all very different. But there are a couple things I've learned that I think can apply pretty broadly. So first is the importance of proactive communication. So coming from both of you, so that's a 2-sided thing. And what can help with that is developing a relationship. So understanding your teammates. What I mean by that, some questions you might want to ask. Okay, how statistically minded are they? How much do they know about analytics? How much do they feel that you are part of a team with them or that you are some outside gatekeeper? And to help develop that relationship, what you want to do is help demonstrate value. So you don't want to be someone who just kind of swoops in and is like, your experiment was effective or it wasn't effective. Because where you can actually be the most helpful is sometimes in the beginning of the process. You can help with prioritizing different plans that they want to do. You can help say, okay, is this even possible with the data we have? Can we even measure this? And finally, you can help with sequencing. So for example, if they are interested in 2 experiments and one is introducing new filters and one is another experiment meant to increase filter usage, well, you probably want to put the increasing filter usage one first because you'd imagine any new filters are only going to be so effective as much as people use them. And as I mentioned, you want to get this early involvement. When I say no postmortems, this comes from a Robert Fisher quote where he said, to ask a statistician to evaluate an experiment after it's finished is to ask him to conduct a postmortem. He can at most tell you what it has died of. And I think this is a really important point. Fortunately, it hasn't happened to me yet, where they come in and say, we already ran it, it was great, stopped it a week, but now we want to know X, Y, Z. And I'm like, well, we didn't measure X, Y, Z during the experiment, so we can't really do that. But even early experimentation doesn't just mean, okay, they tell you or you're involved the day before they run the experiment. But again, trying to get involved very early can make sure, okay, everything they want to measure, can they measure it? Do they need to fire new events? So something we've done is, you can fire a back-end or a front-end event. So I want to record filter usage. There's a couple different ways you can do that, but let's make sure we're at least doing it one way. And that way you can just be much more effective working with them. So the next strategy I've developed is dealing with ad hoc questions. What I mean by that is getting a question like, what's the conversion rate of people in Estonia on a Saturday looking in the wedding category? So something just, something that you don't have offhand, or that doesn't take, literally, at this point, there are some very basic questions that I can get that I can point like, hey, I already did a report on that. If you know any SQL, here you go. But so what do you do with these questions that don't fall into that? My first response is I say, what decision are you using this for? And why do I do that? And it's really two reasons. So the first is it helps avoid this situation where I'd look much less happy than Harry, but basically where you're just overloaded with questions and requests and you can't get done sort of longer term, more impactful work. But the other reason is it checks the translation. And what I mean by that is, someone I follow on Twitter, and she said, okay, she has a slide where she says, part of our job as data science, as data analysts, is take a business question, translate it to a data question, find the data answer, and translate it back to a business answer. But what happens sometimes is you get a data question, and they might not actually realize that that is not going to answer their questions. So what this does is this helps you check the translation, because if you ask what is the business motivation behind this decision or this question that you're asking me, you may help them say one of two things. One, okay, it's not even necessarily that important, or sorry, there are other higher priority projects I have. But in other cases, you say, oh, actually, you don't want this metric, you want this one. Or I think this is a better direction to go in to help you. And so, this is a little example of kind of my day-to-day, but the other big part, of course, is, as I said, I work with teams on their experimentation. And I think the Microsoft experimentation platform team put it best when they said, that doesn't work. Sometimes our job is to tell clients that their new baby is ugly. And what do I mean by this? Well, so business partners and experiments, there's often a lot of investment in them. And what I mean is occasionally there can be financial investment. So if the team you're working with, if they have certain goals set that say, okay, our experiments are going to lead to X amount of incremental money for our company by the end of the quarter, that's financial investment. Maybe even there are bonuses tied to that. But even putting that aside, there's just this emotional investment. That's because people build things that they think are going to be useful, right? They're not just throwing things at the wall. They've spent a lot of time on this. They're smart people. They've put effort into this experiment. But they often have inaccurate expectations, because what they don't realize is that most experiments fail. So, and that includes at all the big companies, Google, Amazon, with lots of smart and hardworking people. The end of the day, we run experiments because we don't know what's going to work. So the success rate is often much less than 50%, and that's even the success rate of ideas. So if you talk about individual experiments, it goes down. And so with this emotional investment, comes some things like peaking. So peaking is where you look at the results before they're ready. And so I'll get a question. It says, what do the results mean? Very normal question. But my answer might be, it's been up for 15 minutes. Let's wait a little bit. And of course, this is very much a do what I say, not what I do. So, I'm usually the first one checking results, wanting to make sure everything's working. I'm also a bit invested, but at least I can kind of pull myself back. So the strategy I have for dealing with this is, as I said earlier, our experiment results update once a day. So basically, when you get in the morning, you get your cup of coffee, you can go to our Catapult page and you can see basically, okay, yesterday, how did we do? How did that add on to the previous days? So what I've started doing recently is sending daily experiment updates. And this helps two things. So the first thing is it offers interpretation. So often people will be looking at these numbers and not necessarily knowing what they mean. Like, okay, is it a problem it's been 3 days and I don't see a win yet? Or I see this metric moved, but not this one, maybe on the visit level, but not the browser level. What's happening here? And so what I can help offer, and part of my job is to say, okay, don't worry about this, or we still need to run the experiment for a little longer, or maybe, hey, everything looks like it's converged and we're ready to make a decision. And the second thing is it shows that you're monitoring. So it just shows that you're on top of it, that yes, you're aware of what's going on, and so they don't have to worry too much that something's happening and no one's checking in on it. Again, so why do they peak? Well, they want to make fast decisions. And this makes sense. So if they have something, so say we roll out a feature and the ground truth is it does really well. Well, when we're experimenting, we're not showing it to everyone. So if it's making us extra money, we want to show it to everyone as soon as possible. On the other hand, if we have a bad experience, something that's not doing well, we want to bring it back as soon as possible. And finally, even if it's neutral, we still want to ramp it down as quickly as we can, because that way it clears the roadway a bit for other experiments. But of course, the problem with this that they don't realize is the cost of peaking. So here we have a graph, and it just shows, okay, this is where we simulated thousands of experiments that actually there was no difference between A and B. But what happens if you use the p-value as a stopping rule? So you say, okay, as soon as p dips below 0.05, stop the experiment. So you can see all those red squiggly lines. A lot of them are dipping below significance way early, even though on the final day, only 5% of them, as you would hope, show significance. So it just really raises your false positive rate. So one thing we've been working on Etsy is, okay, how can we help solve this problem? So there's a couple of ways we can do. You can do kind of a really, just simple rule of adjust the p-value threshold. So the nice thing is easy to interpret. And what I mean by this is, set of p equals 0.05. Let's say you check every day, okay, now you have to find p equals 0.02, or it has to be below p equals 0.01. So again, very easy to interpret, but it's not very rigorous. So as you heard when I kind of said this, it's just sort of putting some arbitrary p-value rules there. The other one is just outlaw peaking. Just say, no, you can't do it. Either we're just putting our foot down, we're not going to make a decision before 2 weeks, or even at the extreme, just not let people see the results. So this is the correct way to do it. This is how p-values were designed. You set a sample size, or in our case at Etsy, you set a number of days, and then you don't check until that day you look, p-value above or below 0.05, you make your decision. But the big problem here is you miss bugs. So something that happens is maybe you're running an experiment, and the first day you see results, you go, oh no. We are supposed to be, we have this new filter, we want to measure usage, but it's saying it's 0%. It's probably not actually 0%, it must be that we're not firing or we're not recording when people use this filter. Or otherwise, we say, okay, everyone in our variant should have this event firing, and only 75% do. Oh, when I filter it by country, it turns out it's only working for US. So that is really one of the huge benefits of seeing your experiment results early, is you can just catch these bugs very quickly. So the final solution is something called continuous monitoring. So this is something that some Stanford professors derived, and one of the companies I mentioned earlier, Optimizely, uses this for their experimentation platform. And essentially what this is an always valid p-value. So it's a way that you can peak and you can stay rigorous. So you don't have to do too much explaining about it to the business partners, because it's just they can kind of check when, okay, if it's p-value less than 0.05, then we're good. The problem is it's complicated to implement and explain. So if you're not working with Optimizely, work out the math yourself, you have to put it in your engineering system. And the other thing is when I say explain here, you'd have to explain why suddenly we're seeing a lot fewer tests with p-value less than 0.05, and that's going to raise a lot of questions. So with that all being said, we're still evaluating what the best method is. It may be a hybrid of these or even more that I didn't mention, but I wanted to give an example of a lot of companies face this kind of questions when you're giving data science products to people not trained in statistics or data science. And one answer to this, you can do education, you can change your systems, but there's just a lot of options you have to go with here. And I want to say, to end this presentation, at the end of the day, I love this comic, so this is just the short end section of it. What it says is the more programming I do, the more I run into things where I don't know, Google doesn't know, my colleagues don't know, but guess what? We still have to do it. And I say, right, this is why they pay a human with a brain who can investigate and learn. And so I think that's why this field is so interesting, is, it's not a place where you can go to the back of the textbook and find the answer. When we were trying to figure out, okay, we're working right now, how do we do GMS per user? We're pretty sure other companies have done this or something similar with revenue, but if they have, they're not really publishing it. And so we have to do a process like we did for ACBV and, sort of go our own way, make our own system. And that can make it really hard, but it also makes it really interesting. So if you want to learn more about A/B testing, I've put a couple resources here. So slides will be shared afterward. These are all links. So these are just some of the experimentation papers that I talked about at the beginning, sort of published by companies like Microsoft and LinkedIn. Some of them are more technical than others, but I actually find a lot of them are pretty accessible to people with some basic stats and data knowledge. I also want to thank everyone who helped me with this presentation, with the teams I work with at Etsy, and finally say thank you to you all. So here's the link to the slides. That's my blog and that's my Twitter handle. And I'm happy to take any questions either more formally right now, or you can catch me afterward. I will be at the bar. Thank you very much.
Hi, great presentation. Very quick though. In the world of A/B testing, do they test on price? Do you have any information on that?
Sure. So price, and by price I assume you mean like the price of the goods, right? So that's a very interesting topic. So the short answer at Etsy is no, we don't test it on the buyer side, so we don't show buyers different prices. And the reason for that is partly we don't control it, so sellers set their own prices. But even at companies where that's not the case, I've heard that's a very difficult thing to test on, because while it obviously gives you a lot of good information, your consumers are going to get very angry if they realize that some people are seeing cheaper goods than they are. So I haven't looked too much into it just because it doesn't apply as much at Etsy. But yes, from what I read, that's something that's less common to be tested, just because in terms of a almost PR standpoint, that you don't want your customers feeling like, wow, now I can't trust the prices, or they'll probably start gaming the system. Yeah. So the question was, how do you pick what variables to prioritize when you're thinking of tests? Is it a slow process? That's a great question. So I will say quickly at Etsy, so usually we don't need very long to test our changes. So if you're a company that has a very small amount of traffic, it may take a long time. But still at Etsy, it takes at least a week, and that's partly to control for kind of weekly seasonality. So how do we choose prioritize? So the first thing we look at is what % of our traffic is it affecting? So even if we have, we just think this is going to be a great change, but it only applies to people in Lithuania logging in on a Saturday. Even if that increased their conversion rate by 10%, compared to a small increase on our search page, which gets a lot more traffic, it just wouldn't be that impactful. So that's kind of the first step. We do something called opportunity sizing. We say, okay, if this led to a 1% conversion rate change, how much money would that generate? And that's basically based on the traffic size and the current rate of how much people buy on that page. But the other question is, I think this brings something back a little bit on the speed. So, when in that first example experiment I showed, we bundled 4 things, and usually, that's not the best practice, and you saw how that can go wrong. So that's one way to speed it up, is you just try some changes together. But one of the reasons we did that is the alternative was, are we going to try each of them at once? And then are we going to try each of them interacting with each other? Because maybe they don't work by themselves, but together they work really well. And then you would get 16 experiments. So, sometimes what we do in order to prioritize things is we say, okay, which changes do we think can go together? And we can sort of put them out as a bundle, even though we know theoretically it's not the best way to test. This is just the practicality of what we have to do.
Hi, I guess continuing with that, is there an effort to go beyond one-off type of testing and use more sophisticated factorial models? And as far as the peaking, there's a large literature about adaptive testing in the pharma world that might be relevant in this situation. So it's kind of where the design is, there's an intention to stop the peak.
Yeah. that's really interesting. Yeah, so that's certainly something else that I've seen before, and I think that's a little bit of the continuous monitoring idea too, which is basically like, okay, if the effect's big enough, we can stop early, right? Because whenever you power a test, it's assuming the effect size is a certain amount, say a 1% change. But if we have a 10% change, well, we're going to know a lot sooner because it's just a much more dramatic change. So that's a little bit on your question of like the pharma, and so I think that is something we're definitely looking into is, okay, how do other industries or other people solve this peaking problem? And can you remind me of the first part of your question? Mm-hmm. Yes, multi-factor design. Yeah, so that is something that actually one of our analysts is looking into now. So how we can basically try different combinations of variables in the most efficient way possible. I would say we don't have that implemented yet, aside from sort of just, again, like a simple design, like, okay, let's try out a multivariant where, we have, variant where we introduce change A, one where we introduce change B, and then a third one where we do AB. But that is something we're looking at to help speed up experimentation, is doing the factorial design.
Yeah, I had a question about your general metrics selection in terms of like GSM and ACDB. Do you go through, just about your process, do you go through sort of some correlation checks, like to really select which metric to drive your experiments?
So I would say in choosing the metrics, so generally we have a set of key metrics. So basically this is, even if your experiment isn't targeting this, we have it on the experiment page, so we make sure you don't accidentally take them. And those key metrics are things, make sense, things like our, GMS, our conversion rate, and the ACVB, like how much value are people buying. So I would say in choosing what metrics to use, generally that's the first one we go to, is, okay, is it gonna move this main needle? And then the next one is some lower down things. So sometimes we'll look at, okay, how can we get, we think we have some really great filters, how can we get filter usage up? Or occasionally we'll have ones that are like, okay, let's just make sure that nothing gets messed up. So like the color change, that was more foundational because our design team wanted to make a more unified site experiment. We didn't really think it would increase people buying, but we ran an experiment to make sure that it didn't have any negative effects. So I would say we have a pretty standard set of key metrics, although it does vary for different groups. So maybe if you're in the auto-suggest group, again, you're monitoring the big key metrics, but you want more people to click our auto-suggestions. So it does depend a little bit on the team.
So I just had a quick question. Something we do a lot in behavioral is kind of controlling for the source of the testing control. Since you guys aren't on the long state, how do you control for that?
Yeah. So I think, so your question was asking, how do we control for the fact that people might be seeing both variants? Is that right, since we don't do a signed-in thing? Yeah, so that's a great question. So an example here would be like if you're on your browser, your Safari at work, and then you go to Chrome on your home laptop, so you're not signed in, you might see two different variations. So we do make sure, like, okay, while you're still on your Safari at work, you're not seeing two different variations, but people use, the apps, they use their home device, et cetera. So the short answer is this is a really difficult problem for people who aren't signed in. So for signed in, right, you could start controlling for this. You can say, okay, that's, clearly you're the same person. But how do we do it for signed out? And so we've explored a couple options of, okay, there are some companies out there that help offer ways for you to tell, I think it's based on location data, or maybe like some other logs in of, okay, this phone like links to this laptop and is the same person. But, then we've been evaluating that ourselves because we can say, okay, let's take, how well does this do in the cases where we know the truth? Like someone is signed in, are they matching them? So that's one avenue we're working on, but I would say, but overall, outside of that efforts is actually something that we're currently not controlling for, and that's partly because at most we could, control that well for only a small subportion of our population that's signed in. Sorry, I can't hear. Could you just grab the mic again? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say except for these outside vendors, like, I mean, we could try. I think people have tried looking at more behavioral thing, but it's just hard when we have so many millions of people. We don't have that much information on them all the time, right? It's not like we're getting their, home address and like, oh, they, again, if they never log in, we don't know they logged in at the same place. But I think that's a really good point, and that is something that we worry about sometimes. Yeah.
Do you dissect your data by any different market segments, and how do you decide which segments you're interested in looking at after a test? And then once you have the results, do you ever release a winner to just a specific audience and not to everyone on that?
Yeah, so we have, so there's a couple different parts to that question. So I was asking about, do we ever look at the results by different market segments? And, with that, do we ever maybe release, our change only to a certain portion? So first answer, so our internal tool actually allows us to slice an experiment by a couple different ways. So we can look at, by your region, by your language, by, are you on Safari or Chrome, et cetera. But most of the time, that's a little more useful for bug catching or very extreme results. And part of that is because generally we're not powered to know those changes, because we generally run an experiment about just as long as it takes to detect, say, a 1% change overall. But then, of course, if you start chopping up the traffic, we generally don't have enough data. That being said, so I would say most experiments generally target everyone, and usually we would launch to everyone. Unless, again, there's some extreme thing that oh my God, we broke this experiment with Chrome and this doesn't load on Chrome browsers, but that's more of a bug. That being said, there have been a few experiments. So some of our experiments with different countries, how we, there's a thing called local boost where essentially you see more items from someone in your country because shipping cost is cheaper, et cetera. That's something we've tested and occasionally rolled out to certain countries and not others. So that's an example where we did very targeted because, maybe this works for Italy, but it doesn't work for Germany. And finally, we also do some things differently for new buyers on Etsy. And, how we can measure new buyers the way we're doing it now, it's not perfect, but the best way is just, is this the first time we've ever seen your cookie? So they will see a different experience. Partly that's because, we don't have recently viewed items for them. We don't have recommendations from what they've done, but also because we think, okay, they need to be served a little bit of a different content about Etsy.
Two more questions over here.
Hey, hi. So I have a question. So we make sure that after running an A/B experiment, we make sure that it's 95% confident or 99%. And we roll this out to 100%. Do you have any process in place where you monitor the results post-rollout so that it's performing similar to what we saw in the A/B test? Because sometimes post-rollout we might not see the same effect we saw in the A/B test.
Yeah, so that's a good question. This is basically, do we do any post-experiment monitoring? And the short answer is generally no. And actually, we were at a data science talk the other day, and Facebook was up there, and they say, why do we run experiments? They had this really nice graph where it's because product managers think, okay, it's going to be a flat line. We launch our experiment, it goes way up, and then it's flat again. So it's very clear it's our experiment. But the graph actually looks very squiggly. And so essentially what it boils down to is it would generally be very hard to tell, because we could try doing a time series analysis or predicting without the experiment how would it go. But as I said, we're not moving metrics. It doesn't go from 6 to 7%. It goes from 6 to 6.03. So if the day after it rolls out, it goes to 6.02. I mean, that's just, we have a lot of, that's very normal variation. So I would say I think that's a really interesting idea, and maybe I can talk more about how you might tackle that problem, but right now we don't do that.
Just in terms of your human factors part, we also embed with other teams, and getting buy-in from the teams is also a problem we struggle with. Could you just talk briefly about how you tackle that problem and some pointers that maybe sure other people have the same issues and maybe other people could use?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So it's on how do you, when you're embedding with teams, kind of how do you gain trust and buy-in? And so I think there's a couple answers to this question. And the first thing is going back to that snowflake side. I've worked with 2 different teams, and I've had different relationships with them, and I don't feel I've necessarily changed that much, but just knowing going in, I think it's really good to know it's you know, it's not necessarily all on you. It's like they'll have different working relationships, and it just might be you might never like embed as much as you would. Maybe they're in a different location, or there's other factors. That being said, I think there's a couple things. So I would say we've never really had a problem of buy-in of like we should run experiments, you know, or you know we should trust our analysts to interpret experiment results generally. And partly that's because as a wider company, Etsy is pretty data-driven. So we, you know, no team would kind of get by with saying, oh, we generated $20 million in revenue, and we just know this because we launched the product. So, you know, I'm looking, I think at some companies, maybe when their data science is a little younger, you do face that issue. I haven't faced that issue as much. But that being said, I think, you know, going back a little bit, I think one thing is demonstrating value, and I think part of this can be doing things that aren't necessarily always the most interesting to you. So we have Looker, which is a business intelligence tool. You basically interface with SQL and it makes graphs. Is it the most exciting thing for me to program in the world? Not really. That being said, is it really useful to help partner teams like get these dashboards and get all this information that was locked away before? Yes. And so I think, you know, sometimes in data science you be like, oh, I just want to work on like the coolest algorithms or, you know, the most new statistical tests. I'm just going to bury my head in the books for 2 weeks and emerge and go back to my teams and here you go. I think it really helps you get the band, you know, and you can do that. But I think what gives you the runway to do that is demonstrating value early on with some, you know, maybe a little more boring or simpler things, but that you know that will help them. And I think the final thing is just, you know, the title slide is proactive communication. This is something I'm still working on, but, you know, realizing that, you know, they're just sort of a general business, but they're not in your head, and as much as you can, helping them and being very approachable. So never necessarily assuming or, you know, making, you wouldn't make fun, but you'd be like, oh my gosh, you don't know what a power is or a p-value is, but just being seen as someone who's very approachable and happy to educate, and then they'll be willing to ask you those questions instead of saying just going and making decisions anyway.
So thank you very much. I'm sure you have many more questions, so come to the bar and ask. I do ask everyone to pick up any of those seats, throw it out, and go straight to the bar. We do have to vacate the space pretty quickly. So she'll be there answering all your questions. Thank you for coming.